philosophy has recently arisen against the traditional philosophical method of inquiry, and in particular against the so-called conceptual analysis and the use of intuition and thought experiments. So roughly, to put my card on the table, I want to argue that at least with respect to contemporary analytical metaphysics, those critics fail. So the idea roughly will be that although the polemical target of experimental philosopher maybe like so although those critics may manage to get a certain kind of methodology wrong, this methodology, as a matter of fact, is not the one that most analytical contemporary analytical metaphysics employ, and anyway is not the right kind of methodology for metaphysics. So, what is precisely the polemical target of an experimental philosopher? Well, as I say, this is conceptual analysis. Well, first of all, we should distinguish two uses of the notion of the term conceptual analysis. In a first sense, the one that we use when we say something like giving or providing a conceptual analysis of the concept X, for instance, a conceptual analysis of knowledge. A conceptual analysis is a claim or an hypothesis about the structure of a certain concept and its connection with other concepts. So that's how the experimental philosopher think about conceptual analysis in this sense. For instance, the Platonic analysis of knowledge has it that knowledge is justified through belief. And this is to be understood, according to the experimental philosopher, as a claim about the constitution of our concept of knowledge and its essential links with other concepts. According to the second sense of conceptual analysis, the one that we employ when we say things like doing conceptual analysis, or we talk about conceptual analysis as a method, in this sense, conceptual analysis is the intellectual activity that leads us to claims about the structure of our concept, namely that lead us to conceptual analysis in the first sense. Where lead us is to be understood as lead us legitimately. So it's an activity that is a source of knowledge or at least of justification. And this is the typical, in the reconstruction of the traditional philosophical method, it's actually the typical form of, it leads us to the typical form of philosophical knowledge, okay, or philosophical justification. And such an activity also is purported to be a priori in the sense of being based solely on our competence in using the concept and the linguistic items connected to them. And moreover, such a competence reveals itself, as it were, in the capacity to assess as correct or incorrect the application of concepts to circumstances or, generally speaking, scenarios. And generally, such assessments are called intuitions or intuitive judgments. And so that's why a central tool of conceptual analysis in this sense is the use of thought experiment to test a given conceptual analysis in the first sense. So thought experiments are imagined scenarios with respect to which we are asked to assess application of concept through the use of intuition. For instance, we are asked whether we agree in classifying a certain imagined case as a case of knowledge or not. So we will see a little bit more in detail the example of the gate-year case, as you might have already suspected for what I'll say now later on. But now let me state more clearly what is the experimental philosopher criticism to the methodology of conceptual analysis. So the idea is that intuition concerning the applicability of concept to given circumstances are not universally shared. According to the experimental philosopher, that has been proven by experiment on the verbal reaction of a large samples of non-professional philosophers belonging to different cultural and social settings. And so not just different culture in the sense of Western and Eastern, but also they claim to have checked the difference between different social status or gender, all this kind of. So what the experiments show is a wide sensitivity of intuition to contingent factors, as I just said. So since there is no reason to think that the intuition shared by the majority in the philosophers' community are privileged, conceptual analysis turned out to be, at best, an elucidation of the basis, of the bias shared by professional philosophers towards a certain conception over others. So the critic aims at being very radical with respect to this methodology as being defined. So the traditional philosophical approach is badly faulted because traditional philosophical activity consists fundamentally in the conceptual analysis of ordinary concepts such as knowledge, intentional action, time, and the like, but there is nothing like the ordinary concept of knowledge, the ordinary concept of intentional action, the ordinary concept of time, and so on and so forth. And so basically nothing is left of philosophy in this sense. So the idea is that at least certain experimental philosophers are very radical here. They want to say, no, it's completely mistaken, from the very start, the way philosophy is going. So there are two different kind of reactions. One that, like, stubborn philosopher, if you want, can have. So we can think about two criticisms with respect to this approach. One, I would say, is more internal, and the second one is more external. As a matter of fact, they are both external in the sense that both are being endorsed by people that disagree and that they don't think themselves as experimental philosopher. But the first one is more internal in the sense that in a way it might be even endorsed by someone who thinks that the general project of experimental philosopher, roughly that of just getting clear on what are the ordinary intuitions, since we cannot talk about the ordinary intuition about blah blah blah, because that, according to them, is proved wrong, is arguing against the very methodology of the experimental philosopher. So the idea is that now here we are never really sure whether we can rule out all factors that may influence the empirical responses, and so we cannot really so be sure that of what we are testing when we do those tests. Whereas the second kind of reaction against experimental philosopher is arguing that well, assume that methodologically speaking, all those experiments actually prove what they want to prove. Well, that's really not relevant, because the polemical target that they hit is not, it doesn't coincide with the methodology of philosophy as is actually done. So as I said before, that's what the kind of line that I will follow. So a rough response to the experimentalist along the line of this second strategy is just saying, well, in particular, if we look at what we might call post-neo-empiricist metaphysics, where metaphysics, with metaphysics I just mean theories concerned with very general view about how reality is like, so focused on very general notions, like the nature of space and time, the nature of knowledge, the nature of modality, namely the possibility of necessity, nature of the mind, of meaning, and so on. Well, we just, if we focus on that, we just see that actually the actual methodology that those theories employ is what I would call a broadly or enlarged, if you want, Quinian methodology of evaluating the various virtues of the competing theories, in particular the theoretical virtues, namely things like as the one that before. So ontological and ideological economy, simplicity and elegance, and explanatory power mainly. Let's focus on these three ones. And in order to do that, we actually what we are employing here is a sort of naturalized epistemology, and so it is a kind of a posteriori stance, or rather a stance that follows from the denial of a deep distinction between the a priori and the posteriori. And that, from that follows also a sort of a skeptical stance about a distinction between strict conceptual competence and a more diffuse world competence. So, in this sense, one might say, well, actually, the contemporary metaphysics is endorsed it's quite skeptical toward the possibility of knowledge of justification on a purely conceptual ground. But on the other hand, as also Mario's talk before showed us, one may be happy to accept this general criticism of the sharp distinction between the a priori and the a posteriori, without thereby denial any use of some notion of the a priori. So even if we deny that pure conceptual analysis, as is characterized by the empirical philosopher, is indeed sort of a parody of a methodology. That doesn't mean that maybe things like thought experiments or appeal to intuition are completely useless tools for philosophy. Okay. So, also because the alternative might be something like trying to put the whole of philosophy into the empirical side. Actually, I will discuss very shortly an attempt to qualify a philosophical, a kind of philosophical methodology and knowledge as a kind of empirical, totally empirical knowledge. And like Robert Almeder in Harmer's Naturalism in 1989, he actually tried to distinguish what is like the specific kind of philosophical knowledge from the more general scientific knowledge by saying that a claim or a hypothesis is a scientific claim or hypothesis when at a certain time t, when is explicitly testable at a time t. And with explicitly testable, he means something like that, well, there is someone in a position to state the observational condition that would confirm or disconfirm the hypothesis X. Whereas philosophical hypotheses are those that are only implicitly testable. at a certain time, namely when there is just some probability. So we are not completely rational in thinking that there are some observational data that would justify the acceptance or rejection of Y, sort of X, although nobody is in a position to state them. Now, there are many reasons to deny the actual viability of such a distinction. In particular, there's a nice article by Nedelhofer that showed quite convincingly that since with explicit testability we should anyway understand a potential or explicit in principle testability, because otherwise the thesis clearly becomes completely not convincing, then it's really like difficult to understand how to distinguish the implicitly testable from the explicit but in principle testable. Okay, and at the end of the day, that would just make philosophical questions. So that they were just at the end of the day we just would end up saying that there can be philosophical questions, but there can be only non-philosophical answers, and so basically philosophy, we would end up just looking at philosophy just as a sort of form of immature science. But what is more important here, I think that, and more relevant, is that many philosophical disputes seems to be about theses that are not even implicitly testable. So things about typical question about a contemporary ontology, whether the sum of simple exists or not. So if we accept ordinary extensional mereology, we have an axiom that says that given any entities, there exists something that has such entities as parts. So the sum of any entities exists, and so there is a lot of discussion about whether we should accept or not this principle. And the discussion is not whether it's useful or not in mereology as mathematics, but it's whether we should accept it as a principle of ontology. But at the same time, it's very doubtful that we can think about that there is somehow around an experience that can confirm or disconfirm this theory. I mean, one might think that you never know, maybe who knows how science will look like in 3,000 years. Maybe we will think differently. Yeah, but anyway.
What's the dilemma in that particular problem in mereology?
The dilemma is whether we should accept that given any entities, there is a further entity which has as its parts all those other entities. Oh. So my nose exists. How is it called, the fortress here? The Calanegnan fortress exists. Therefore, exists an object which is composed by my nose and the fortress. Okay. So it's a counterintuitive principle by fairly reasonable standard of what counts as intuitive. But many people, many philosophers think that we have good reason to accept it, because a theory that encodes this principle as more theoretical virtues than a theory that denies, so can solve more problems, and as the ontology is bigger, but they think that it's a cost that we should pay. And even more complex cases in which we ask not just whether certain sums exist, but also whether further entities over and above those sums exist. So think about all the discussion about whether we should think that the statue is something over and above the marble which is composed of. So here the dilemma is not between the particles that compose the block of marble and the block of marble. Everybody, I mean, it's totally irrelevant whether we, the point is that given that there exists the sum of all the particles, namely the block of marble, does exist also a statue here? And again, you know, the argument here is that are things like, well, you know, the statues has certain modal properties that the block of marble doesn't. So maybe by the principle of identity of indiscernible, we should say that we have two entities here. Of course, they are collocated, but of different sorts, so collocation of things of different sorts is acceptable. And, you know, we have all those kind of debates that clearly it seems very difficult to think that for every single claim at issue, we should think that there is empirical evidence for denying or accepting any of them. So, but of course, the point is that if most philosophical questions are not empirically testable, and on the one hand, and if the mere conceptual analysis is no longer a source of knowledge, or in a way we don't want to concentrate on this as a source of knowledge, we seem to be a little bit as caught in an impasse, because I mean, there is always the risk to turn philosophy in an utterly speculative enterprise, if not into a useless, into a use of language completely disconnected from reality. And of course, that was, for instance, one of the critics that traditional empiricist rises against, as many metaphysics, not that what it's at best an emotional use of the language, but it's completely meaningless, and blah blah blah. And I think that this risk is always there, but I mean that's just the general risk of doing bad philosophy. That's always there. That we should be very aware not to do that. But that's just as anyone who wants to endorse certain intellectual enterprise should always be aware that there is always the risk of doing bad philosophy or doing the bad counterpart of this enterprise. But how should we avoid the risk then? Namely, now, what, if any, is the best methodology for metaphysics? So how, in general, should we evaluate the plausibility of metaphysical claim, given that on the one hand, they are not observational, or at least we accept that there can be a certain amount of metaphysical claims that are not observational. But on the other hand, any outright appeal to intuition is suspect, or at least has to face the challenge posed by the empirical philosopher. So on the other hand, on the one hand, we have to make sense of there being substantial debate concerning matters that are not observational, but on the other hand, as I said, we have to shield against the criticism of conceptual analysis as a methodology. So I think there are at least two ways to do that. So the first one, just very briefly, is on agreeing on the characterization of conceptual analysis and the role of thought experiments that the experimental philosopher give, and but still try to defend conceptual analysis as a reliable source of a priori knowledge. And so think of people like Frank Jackson or David Chalmers here, which, I mean, not by chance are explicitly labeled as defenders of conceptual analysis. So in particular, they argue that we can know a priori modal truths because there is no gap between what is conceivable and what is metaphysically possible. Of course, here in mind, what I have in mind is a notion of conceivability, which is highly idealized. It is usually, for instance, in the case of Chalmers, what he calls this ideal negative conceivability. So the idea that we can, so that in principle, we can always find out whether a certain hypothesis is contradictory or not. And this is a sort of a peculiar form of direct and intuitive knowledge that's why, now, since it's so highly idealized, it's supposed to fall outside the scope of the attack of experimental philosopher. So a nice way to defend conceptual analysis on this line is the one by Kirk Ludwig, for instance, and which I will just briefly sketch because I will after make reference to a certain aspect of it. So philosophers are experts with respect to the correct condition of application of concept. So they are in a better position to evaluate whether a certain concept applies to certain circumstances or not. So the reflexive judgments of the layman towards which the experimental philosopher shows so much interest are actually not relevant for what philosophy is doing. So basically the idea here is that, say, the polemical target of the experimental philosopher is indeed, well, maybe it's a little bit, too superficial to the way they describe it, but rough, I mean, is indeed, I mean, they agree that the methodology of the a priori inquiry, the methodology of philosophy is some strong notion of a priori inquiry along the line of conceptual analysis in this sense. But they want to say, but nonetheless, we don't need to appeal to implausible sources of knowledge in order to defend this view. So to defend the view that conceptual analysis, in this very sense, is a useful tool in philosophy. Now, I don't, and I think that Mario is not too distant from this point of view. Anyway, I know, maybe I'm there. Yeah, okay. Anyway, I want to try another way, which is not completely, it's not incompatible with this point of view, but it's as I said before, trying to show how that actually the conceptual analysis should be the methodology of metaphysics should be thought in terms that are quite different from that of conceptual analysis. So the idea is disagreeing on maintaining that the conceptual analysis and the use of thought experiment as characterized by the experimental philosopher is the methodology of contemporary metaphysics. So I think that the idea is here that as I said before, is to look at this broadly Quinean methodology. And I don't, the idea here is that since that is not tantamount to pushing philosophy completely toward the empirical, we should at least make sense of the use of things like thought experiments or this kind of tools within this broadly Quinean methodology. So the use of thought experiments and intuition is not irrelevant in defending one theory over the other. So the general idea of the methodology, I will pin down a little bit more precisely what I mean with this broadly Quinean methodology. But the general idea, as I said before, is this evaluation of the cost and benefits of the various theories and thought of theoretical virtues. And the idea here is that, well, if that doesn't mean just simply going towards the empirical and the observational, we don't want that because we want to claim also that many metaphysical theories deals with claims that are not simply just not testable. Then we have also to endorse some use of thought experiment or this more abstract kind of intellectual tools within this methodology. So that is that even if the criticism of the experimental philosopher is sound with respect to conceptual analysis as they think about it, well, it still falls short of menacing the actual methodology of much contemporary metaphysics, if that is. So the methodology that in mind is quinine in two central respects. First of all, some sort of continuity with science, a kind of continuity with science which is actually, I think, compatible with what you say, Mario, before you go. So that is that not just the methods of philosophical inquiry are not utterly distinct from those of other disciplines. The most empirical, like physics or the special sciences, but also history, but also from the most abstract, such as mathematics. So the idea is that that there is this continuity, not just because philosophy use, tools that are typical of the more empirical sciences, but also for the other way around. Also because thought experiments has been used in physics, in theoretical physics, by Einstein, for instance, or by Galileo before. And theoretical physics indeed may include non-testable elements, and that's it's true in general of many other scientific disciplines. I mean, think about a different interpretation of quantum mechanics. They are all, by definition, observationally equivalent. So they want to square with the Schrödinger equation and with all the prediction that the standard formalism of quantum mechanics does. Otherwise, they would be simply false. They will be failed to be scientific theories. But the debate between them is there. It is in terms of, for instance, explanatory power, elegance, ontological economy, namely in terms of their theoretical virtues. So that's methodology of evaluating the theoretical virtues of different disciplines is there also in science. And of course, also certain metaphysical theories include testable claims, and so they can be disproved or confirmed by evidence. For instance, I mean, in the first talk of this morning, we had I would say that most naive form of essentialism with respect to biological kinds have been just disconfirmed by empirical evidence in biology. So if you think just that tigers are their DNA, or are some very precise piece of DNA, well, it just false. And your theory, I mean, the theory that this piece of empirical evidence is falsifying, it's a theory about what is the essence of tigers. So it's definitely a metaphysical theory. So in general, if we think that, and that's simply like that, because I mean, if we think that it is necessarily true that tigers have certain kind of DNA, well, if we find in the actual world a counterexample to that, we have found we have found also in a possible world, namely the actual, a counterexample to that. So we have found a counterexample to the thesis that in every possible circumstances, in every possible world, tigers have those properties, namely that is an essential property of tiger. So, and the second aspect with respect to which this methodology is quinine is that the idea of theoretical virtues is central. So the arguments for philosophical tenets have the form of often comparative, not always, but evaluation of costs and benefits of the theories in which they are formulated. So where costs and benefits are precise of those of the theoretical virtues. So the idea is here that there's always a sort of exercise of reflective equilibrium between the various aspects, so a trade-off between ontological economy, ideological simplicity, explanatory power, and so on and so forth. But it's also enlarged with respect to the Aquinan still wide, broadly empiricist stance into further respect. First of all, it doesn't concern only matter of ontology, but also of ideology and, broadly speaking, of all conceptual tools that we employ in our theories to talk about the structure of the world. So, and I think this changes in perspective started with Lewis' talk of natural properties. So ideological matter are not just a matter of pragmatics or of attuning with our cognitive setup certain concept that we use in our theory, as I take quite, I think that the original idea in Quine, that precisely was that, the ontology, the ontology of our theories are to be taken seriously because the idea that they commit us towards something to reality. But all what is ideology? Well, that we can go Karna here. No? We can definitely have a more pragmatic stance toward the ideology. We don't have to think that since it's a theory that uses a certain predicate, a certain concept is better than a theory that has the same ontology but uses another predicate, another concept, then we should think that the first concept carves at the joint better reality. No, I'm not saying that's. I don't want to make a point of exegesis. Maybe, but anyway, the idea that in this enlarged methodology, this is indeed the case. So it's not just a matter of what exists, but also a matter of what concept we are using. So if a theory has more virtues than another, we have thereby reasons not only to accept the entities that the theory requires, but also reason to accept its ideology as a more perspicuous representation of the fundamental features of reality. So such a change of perspective has allowed that notion that were thought to be suspect from a strictly empiricist point of view, such as modality and metaphysical determination, non-causal determination, to have a role in our philosophical theories. Well, I have the example of tenses, but I don't have to make it. So the methodology has been enlarged because the theoretical virtues are connected not only to reasons to think that we should accept the existence of certain entities, but also reason to the effect that we should regard the concept adopted as more joint carving or as more perspicuous. And it's enlarged also in another sense, in the sense that the theories under evaluation are not just scientific theories, but more directly, there is a more direct evaluation and comparison between different metaphysical theories. So it's not just a matter of read off the metaphysics underlying our best scientific theories, but rather establishing what is our best metaphysical theory on the ground, on the theoretical virtues of the metaphysical theories candidates, so of the candidates, where the candidates are the metaphysical theories. Okay, so that's why it became crucial the precise formulation of those theories and the use of formal tools. So not necessarily. I'm not saying that if we don't use the formal tool, we can do anything. But the idea that people have started asking more explicitly whether certain systems of modal logic and their model theory capture certain metaphysical feature of reality, and so whether the concept of modality that is encoded by those systems is actually telling us something about the world or not, and the same for tenses or for formal theory of location with respect to, for instance, the theory of persistence through time. So the issue is whether certain expert notion and the claims we formulate through them are to be interpreted as you know, perspicuous or not. So broadly speaking, the disputes here concern questions of realism, not only about what exists, but also how reality is structured. So what are the concepts that carve of the joint, and what are the most perspicuous representation? And modal notion, as I hinted before, here has a sort of a central role, and I will sort of use them as an example. So the idea is that modal claims, when understood in terms of metaphysical modality, and not just things like nomological modality, are typically non-testable. I mean, as I said before, you know, we can disprove a modal claim about you know, what is necessary by finding an actual counterexample and like that. But the idea is that what modality tell us in general is, you know, things that are not testable. So the idea is that so yeah, on the one hand, those modal claims are non-testable, but on the other hand, when we made a modal claim, we actually made a claim concerning reality, not concerning our concept. So when we say something like Socrates is necessarily human, if the question of realism is central to metaphysics, then we are not asking something about the connection between our concept, but we are asking whether Socrates, the actual entity, is necessarily human or not, and not whether the concept of humanity stands in certain connection with other concepts. So, moreover, modal properties you know, seems to be connected to the fundamental aspect of reality. So when we ask about what is metaphysically possible, impossible, or necessary for a certain entity X, we are asking something about the nature of X. And so the fact that I cannot provide empirical evidence to confirm or disconfirm the claim does not entail that the claim is about the concept of being human, in the case of the example issue, or that is conceptual in a sense. Rather, we need to provide a justification why, you know, we should accept or reject such a claim. And both, you know, methodologically speaking, here both realism and anti-realism are on the same boat. So, for instance, if I am an anti-essentialist with respect to race or gender, I mean, I need to, you know, provide arguments for my position exactly as if I were an essentialist. So, insofar I made non-testable claim, I need to, you know, defend those claims on the ground, for instance, sorry, on the ground of some methodology. And what I'm claiming is that it is precisely the methodology of arguing for the theoretical virtues of the theory that embed those claims, the way to go. 1 minute. Cool. Okay, we'll skip the Getty example. I think you already have an idea of what I'm saying. And just okay, so it's crucial. Just let me conclude with that. So it's crucial that the theoretical virtues here are not understood as a matter of being more of whether a theory is more attuned with our cognitive setup or more useful in any sense. But the theoretical virtues here has to be linked with the fact that the theory that we are choosing over the other is indeed more. It tells us things about reality in a more perspicuous sense. But so the idea why the theoretical virtues are important for preferring a theory over another. So I think that there is this, the only kind of argument, I think that this, here we have reached somehow the rock bottom of the methodology. I mean, the only kind of argument that I can think of here is an argument which somehow reminds the argument that Aristotle gave to the skeptics. So the idea is that, okay, if we assume that reality with no structure, if we assume that some portion of structure has to be attributed to reality, that the idea of reality without no structure at all is senseless or anyway is not viable. If we assume then we have to ask, well, then somewhere the line between the notion that catch the structural feature and reality and those that doesn't has to be drawn somewhere. But any other way of drawing this distinction that is not based on what we think to be our best theories is less reasonable than the distinction drawn by according to our best theory. So the methodology of evaluating the virtues of theory in order to establish which are the best one and thereby deriving what is our best choice in distinguishing the features that are catching the deep structural things in reality and the features that are only conventional arbitrary is precisely that of the enlarged Quine methodology that I am defending here. Thanks.
Thank you, Giuliano.